Hi, welcome back. This is Beersborn. We're going to start working on a second enemy today. The difference between our first enemy and our second enemy is going to be mostly due to how they move. Our first enemy chases the player. Our second enemy, we're going to set it up so that it moves in a certain area, in a certain pattern, and you can direct exactly where you want that enemy to move. So it's not going to always chase your player. It might move back and forth in a certain area, or maybe in a loop to guard a certain zone. So let's open up Construct and let's go to our layout. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move my first enemy out of the way. Just drag it up into the gray area so we don't have to worry about that getting in the way. And now we can focus on making a second enemy. I'm going to start by exporting the sprite I have for my second enemy. I'm going to go to Piskel. I'm going to open up the Piskel file that I've created for my second enemy. I'm going to use this worm. Now I want to export this. So I'm going to go to the export button. And what I want to pay attention to is the scale. You want to set the scale to something that's consistent with what you've been using for your other characters. Now I'm using 4x at a 512 resolution. Yours might be different. Yours might be 2x or even 1x. But find the number that you've been using. Now we can do either GIF or PNG on this. Mine is just a single frame. There's no animation here, so I could do a PNG if I wanted to. A GIF is perfectly fine though. And click download. Find a place to save it. I'm going to call this worm idle and save it. Now let's go back into Construct and let's right click anywhere in the open white space and let's insert a new object. You want to scroll down and click just one time on sprite. Now if you click one time, it gives you the opportunity to name it down here. I'm going to call this enemy 2. You can call it something different if you want. Enemy 2, click insert, and then you click anywhere in the white space and it opens up your animations editor. What we want to do is go up to the folder that's up on the top left. We're going to load images from files, and we're going to find the enemy sprite that we just exported. Here's mine. And click open. And there it is. Now I'd recommend naming the animation right now. You can right click on it, hit rename, and let's call this idle or stand, something like that. Good. Let's close it. Now we have it. Now there's a couple things I want to set up in order to make this work. I'm going to add some instance variables. I'm going to add a behavior. Let's start with the behavior. Click on behaviors over on the left side tab and click on add new behavior. What we're going to do is we're going to give it an 8-direction movement behavior so that our enemy can move in any of the 8 directions. Click add. We can close that for now. And then let's go to the instance variables. Now we're going to make 4 instance variables for this guy. What we're going to do is create a system that directs when our enemy should move to the left, to the right, up, or down. So what I'm going to do is make an instance variable for each of those directions. Let's start with left. I'm going to just call it left. I'm going to make the type a Boolean. Now remember, a Boolean is like a true or false statement. So basically what this is, it's going to be a true or false statement that when it's true, our enemy is going to move to the left. And when it's false, our enemy will not move to the left. Let's do the same thing for right. Type Boolean. Now let's do the same thing for up and for down. The idea is that I can tell Construct to turn on any one of these, or maybe even a combination of a couple. Like if I tell it to turn on right and up, it'll go at kind of an angle, a diagonal between up and right. If I tell it to go down, it'll just go straight down. So I can control which direction it moves by turning on and off, by turning true and false, these different variable statements. Cool. Now we have the variables, we have the behavior, but we don't have anything in our event sheet yet. So let's go over to the event sheet. Now we have different groups for everything we've made so far. We have all the different character stuff, and we have a group for our first enemy. And let's add an event. For this one, we're going to use our enemy 2. So I'm going to double click on that. What I'm going to do is create something for each one of those Boolean statements. If I scroll down to is Boolean instance variable set and double click on that, it gives you the different instance variables that we just created. So let's start with left. and click done. What this says is when enemy 2 is left, let's add an action. And if I go to my enemy 2, up in that first section for the 8 direction options, we have an option for simulate control. If you double click on that, we have all the different directions that we can tell Construct to move our character with the 8 direction behavior. So we're going to do left. That's pretty simple, right? Just when the left is true, tell your enemy to move to the left. We're going to do the same thing with the other directions. So let's add another event. Go to enemy 2. We're going to scroll down to is Boolean instance variable set. This time, let's do right. Add action, enemy 2, simulate control, direction, right. So when right is true, simulate moving to the right. Going to go back, add another event, enemy 2 is Boolean instance variable set. Let's do down. Add action, enemy 2, simulate control, down. And now finally, I'm going to do the same thing for up. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you could go about doing that. This is just one system that I think works pretty well, and it's relatively easy to set up. It gets a little complicated, but I think compared to the other things, it's pretty easy. There are a bunch of different ways we can make a character move, but I think this works pretty well. Great. So we have all of our commands set up, but if I press play, nothing happens. My worm just sits there because there's nothing telling Construct when to turn on any of these variables. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a system of timers that will say like, okay, for 2 seconds, turn left on. So it'll move to the left for 2 seconds. And then after 2 seconds, turn right on. So it'll move to the right for 2 seconds. We're just going to use timers to control when these different variables are turned on and off. Now to do that, we're going to use one more behavior. You want to make sure you have your enemy 2 clicked on. And we're going to go down to behaviors on the left panel. I'm going to add a new behavior. This time, I'm going to use timer. Timer is great because it adds a timer function to the events for that enemy. So if I go to add event now, and I click on enemy 2, about really down towards the bottom, there's a section for timer. And we'll see the options are, is timer paused, is timer running, or on timer. We're going to mostly be using this on timer. What that means is when a timer is up, we can make it do something. So let's try it out. Now, we have to name what this timer is going to be called. So let's say this is going to be the timer for moving our enemy to the left. So I'm going to call it move left. It doesn't have to be that name. I feel like that's just an obvious name, so it's easy to keep track of. Let's call this move left. So when we have a timer called move left that's up, we can add an action to move our enemy to the left. All I have to do is go to my enemy 2 and tell the Boolean for left to be true. So when I have a timer for move left, left is true. Now, one thing I'm going to add here is that I'm going to turn the other ones to false. So for example, I'm going to add action, go to enemy 2. I'm going to set the Boolean for this one, right, false. I can do the same thing for up and down. The reason why I'm doing that is because you probably don't want to have more than one of these on at a time. Now, later you might. If you want to do different, diagonal movement and stuff, you can. But for now, I think it makes the most sense to have just one true and the other ones be false. Good. So when the timer for move left is up, we have left true, right false, down false, up false. Perfect. But there's nothing to start this timer yet. There's one more thing I'm going to add. I'm going to make a new event. I'm going to go to my enemy 2, and I'm going to go to onCreated, which means that as soon as our enemy is created, as soon as the game starts, I'm going to add an action. I'm going to go to my enemy 2, and I'm going to start the timer. So click on Start Timer. The first thing it asks you is the duration. How long do you want to wait before this timer is done? Now, this is at the very beginning of the game, so you could have your enemy just sit there for a little bit, just kind of pause before the movement starts. Let's make it a really small number so the movement starts really right as the game begins. So I'm going to type in 0.1, so just a fraction of a second. And then the tag here is where you put in the name for the timer. The name that we're using is move left. You have to have the quotation marks around it. So if you delete those quotation marks, make sure to put them back in. Quotation mark, move left, quotation mark. Click done. I'm going to move this up just to kind of get it out of the way. This is the last time we really have to worry about this. This is just to kind of get the timer started, right? It gets the ball rolling. So after 0.1 seconds, move left is going to turn on. Move left is this one, which tells our left to be true and the rest to be false. Let's try it out. There it goes. Now, is it working? Kind of. It flips upside down, which is a little weird, and it just kind of keeps moving off the side of the screen. Now, the reason why it flips upside down has to do with the 8 direction behavior. And this is something we had to fix in the other ones too. But if you look at the options, one of them says set angle, and by default, it's set to smooth. Set angle just rotates your sprite to face whatever direction it thinks you want it to face. Sometimes that works, most of the time it doesn't. So I'm going to change the smooth to no. That makes it so it won't rotate. The other thing that I'm going to fix while I'm over here is default controls. Default controls are just the arrow keys on your keyboard. So if you have that checked, your player can use the arrow keys to move your enemy, which you probably don't want. So uncheck that box. Now the other things are probably fine for now. If you want to, you can adjust the speed. By default, it's 200, but that's that's just a starting point. If you want your enemy to move faster or slower, you can always adjust that max speed. Let's try it out. There it goes. Now it's just going to keep going left forever, unless we add another timer. So say we add an action to this timer here that says that after it's been moving left, let's set a timer so that it moves back to the right. So I'm going to click on Add Action here. I'm going to click on Enemy 2. I'm going to go down to Start Timer. And the timer I'm going to start for this one, I'm going to call Move Right. Now for the duration, we can decide how long we want it to be moving before it switches to move right. Let's start with 2 seconds. And I'm just kind of making up these numbers. We can always adjust them later, but let's say it's going to move to the left for 2 seconds, and then after that, it's going to start moving right. Now I have to set up this thing for moving to the right. Now we can set it up by hand, or we can copy and paste it. I think a lot of times it makes more sense just to take a whole section, copy and paste it, and make adjustments to it. If you click over here, kind of on the left tab, it selects this whole event. Now, if I right-click, you'll find Copy. Not copy as text, but copy. If I click on that, and then you click down in the white space, you'll find Paste. And what that does is it adds a duplicate of that whole event. What's nice about this is now we can just go in and make some modifications. So let's call this one, instead of Move Left, this is going to be Move Right. It's the name we used up here, right? So I'm going to call this Move Right in quotation marks. And for Move Right, I want to set left to false. And I want to set right to true. So I'm going to turn on my right movement. Up and down can still be false. Now, after it's doing that for a couple seconds, we can start a timer to have it move back to the left. Let's make it just move left and right forever here. So I'm going to set this one back to left. So now I have a timer for moving left. After 2 seconds, it's going to move right. After 2 seconds, it's going to move left again. And it'll just loop between these two forever. Let's try it. Good. Moving to the left for 2 seconds, moving to the right for 2 seconds. Now, one thing that I'm noticing is that my sprite doesn't flip. It doesn't mirror, right? It's facing the right direction when it's moving to the left, but when it's moving to the right, it's just sliding backwards. There's also no animation. We can fix both those things. Let's start by adding a mirror. Up here, when we have enemy 2 is left. We can add another action up here. We're going to say that when it's moving to the left, we can make our enemy 2 either mirrored or not mirrored, just like we did for our other characters. So let's go to set mirrored. Now this is going to depend on which direction you drew your enemy. My enemy, when I drew it, is facing to the left. Yours might be facing to the right. Since mine is facing to the left, I'm going to set this one to not mirrored. If you drew your enemy facing towards the right, I would probably make this mirrored. We can always test it and see if it works. So let's go for it. I'm going to make my left not mirrored. And when it's facing to the right, I'm going to add an action. I'm going to set mirrored to mirrored. So when it's right, it's flipped. When it's left, it's not. Let's test it out. Good. Now, if yours isn't working, if yours is backwards, just change these two. Set one to mirrored and the other one to not mirrored. All right, great. Now, we can make this movement as complicated as we want. If we want to add more time, we can. So for example, if I take this timer and make it 4 seconds, go to this one, make it 4 seconds as well, then it's going to move back and forth for twice as long. I can also adjust my speed. If I want it to move a little bit faster, maybe I'll do 300. Now it's going all the way out the screen, but it should come back. There it is. So you can adjust your speed. You can adjust how long it moves for, but we can also add more movement too. Say, for example, after it moves to the right, maybe I want it to move up. What I can do is I can change this start timer. Instead of moving left after the right is finished, I can change this to move up. And I can take this whole section, right-click on it, copy, go down to the white space, paste, and I can make this section move up. I'm going to change the name of it, move up, and I'm going to change my variables, setting right to false and up to true. So now after it moves left, it's going to move to the right. After it moves right, it's going to move up. After it moves up, then we can have it, let's make it move back down. So I'm going to change this one, move down. Again, right click, I'm going to copy this whole section, go down to the white space, paste it, call this one move down, set my up to false, set my down to true. And as long as the last timer directs us back to the first timer, it'll loop forever. So right now, my last timer says to go to move down, which is what it already is, right? So we want to change this one to go back to move left. So it just keeps going in a loop over and over again. So I'm going to change the name of this one to move left. So once moving down is done, it goes back to moving left. And it should just go through these in a cycle over and over again. Let's try it out. Moves to the left for 4 seconds. Moves to the right for 4 seconds. Moves up for 4 seconds. And moves down for 4 seconds. And it's just going to keep doing that over and over again. Works pretty well. You can do whatever you want with this. So say, for example, on move up, maybe you want it to go up and to the left. If you have more than one of these on at a time, maybe left is true and up is true. And maybe when it's moving down, it's moving down and to the right. You could turn on both down and right. Left is good, right is good. That's moving at an angle. So you can really kind of customize this. You can have as many timers lined up as you want to make a really complex movement. Most of the time when I'm designing a game, I'll keep the movement pretty simple for an enemy like this. Maybe it just walks back and forth in a certain zone, or maybe it makes a square around an area. But I typically don't have anything that's like, 10 or more timers in a row. Usually you don't need that much, but you can. Now, the last thing I think we should add is some animation. If I go into my layout and I double click on my character, I'm going to add an animation for my enemy's movement. Now, if you don't have an animation yet, make your animation first. I've already made one. So if you have an animation finished, you can move on to this step. If you haven't made it yet, then hold off on this and come back later. But let's right-click on the animations window. We're going to add an animation. I'm going to call this one, I'm going to call it walk, even though it's more of a crawl than a walk, I guess. I'm going to click on the load images, and I already have a worm walk ready to go in here. Have all my frames down at the bottom. I would recommend previewing it to see how fast it plays. Mine's a little slow at 5, so I would turn mine up. But yours, it just depends on how many frames you're using. I would also recommend checking the loop box, because usually for walking animations, you want it just to kind of walk over and over and over again in a loop. So click loop. There we go. Just kind of crawling along. So I named it, got the speed set, got the loop checked, and I can close that. Now, an easy way to set the animation is if I scroll down, I can add another event. And if I go to my enemy 2, there's an option under 8 direction for is moving. If I click on that, I can say that whenever it is moving, I can add an action, go to my enemy, and set the animation to walk. Now, you might have a time when your enemy stops moving. So what you can do is you can add another event, go to enemy 2, I can do is moving again, but this time I can right-click on it. And if you remember from our previous videos, if I click on invert, that means it's not moving. Then I can add an action for enemy 2, set animation to idle, and click done. Let's try that out. Good. There it goes, just crawling around. Now, say for example, maybe there's a moment when you want want your enemy to stop moving. Maybe you want it to pause for a minute. You can do that with timers too. So I'm going to copy my last timer. I'm going to paste it. Now, a shortcut to copy and paste is Control and C on your keyboard to copy it, and Control V on your keyboard to paste it. So you don't have to right-click and go through the menu. I use those keyboard shortcuts a lot. You don't have to, but I think it saves time. What I'm going to do is change this one from move down to, I'm going to call it move stop. So it stops moving. And on this one, I can make it so all of the options are false. And if I make this last timer from move down, direct us to move stop, I'm going to make the times shorter too, so you don't have to sit through 4 seconds of my worm moving for each direction. And let's try it out. So moves to the left for 1 second, right to the 1 second, and then down, and it just stops. It goes back and repeats the process again. And because we have this is not moving, set the animation to idle, it stops the crawl animation as soon as it stops walking. So you can get as crazy as you want with this stuff. You can make some really complex patterns as long as you have all the different timers set up correctly. Now, it can be a little complicated, but I think that's probably the easiest way. There are other ways in Construct to set up enemy movement. Some of them you can get really wild and do really complicated stuff, but this is a good place for us at this point. So we'll leave it there. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new group. I'm going to call this enemy 2. And I'm going to take all the stuff that I just made, all of these events, and I can select them all. To select a whole group of things, if you click up on the first one and then just scroll down, I'm going to hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and click on the bottom one, it selects the whole group. And then I can just drag them all as one big group and drop it into Add Event to Enemy 2. Good. Now, if we want to really get organized, we can even add a subgroup, right? If I right-click on Enemy 2, I can add another subgroup. I'm going to call this one Enemy 2 Movement, and I could take all the stuff that I just made, holding down Shift, clicking on the bottom event, and moving this all into that one. So now we can have subgroups for each one, just like we did with Enemy 1. Okay, don't forget to save your work, and let's leave it there today. Thanks.